Welcome to this short informational video produced by CPRE Oxfordshire, which aims to give you an overview of considerations when assessing a planning application situated within the Oxford Greenbelt. I will briefly first outline the history of the Greenbelt concept, the location of Oxford Greenbelt, then go on to discuss what legislation and specific policies should be considered when an application within the Oxford Greenbelt is being assessed. Let's firstly briefly look at the history of the Greenbelt. It was a concept first introduced by Ebenezer Howard in 1902 to give protection and green space between city slum and industrial smog locations. The first legislation in relation to the Greenbelt was introduced in 1955 with the original Greenbelt policy and Circular 4255. It's interesting to see that this initial policy has stood the test of time and altered very little, with the principle being that inside a Greenbelt, approval for applications should not be given. Looking at the Greenbelt today, 12.6% of land in England is designated as Greenbelt, and this falls in 14 areas, the Oxford Greenbelt being one. We can see that the Oxfordshire Greenbelt surrounds the city, falling in all 5 of our county districts. It forms a protective area around the city with a strip running through the city itself. This map shows how land in the Greenbelt is attractive to developers due to its proximity to the city, but land in the Greenbelt is protected from most forms of development by national and local policy, and public opinion is high that it should remain protected. Looking at some statistics, 13.2%, just under 34,500 hectares of land in Oxfordshire, falls in the Greenbelt. This figure has declined over the last decade, and we can see it coming under increasing threat. Nearly 20,000 homes are now coming forward on former Greenbelt land around Oxford, and several industrial-scale solar farms are either permitted or in the pipeline. CPRE Oxfordshire commissioned an independent survey to understand how the residents of Oxfordshire feel about the Greenbelt earlier this year. The results showed that 82% of respondents agreed that the Oxford Greenbelt should remain open and undeveloped. This is an increase from 76% when the same question was asked 10 years ago. And we feel indicative of growing concerns on its erosion. These results are consistent against all ages, locations in Oxfordshire, and whether the respondent is a homeowner or not. So what policies protect the Greenbelt? There is national policy enshrined in the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. Then we have local plan policy at a district level, and sometimes the Greenbelt is referred to in neighbourhood plan policy. These documents all tend to be very large, and many have multiple references to the Greenbelt. So within this presentation, we're aiming to cover and point you in the direction of the key important policies. So let's first look at the National Planning Policy Framework, which was recently revised in December 2023 and sets out in paragraph 143 the 5 main purposes of the Greenbelt. These being to restrict urban sprawl, to prevent settlements from merging, to protect the countryside, to preserve the setting and character of historic towns, and to encourage urban regeneration. In the NPPF, there are different sets of policies covering the Greenbelt. Paragraphs 144 to 151 cover greenbelt boundaries and grounds for alteration. These relate to strategic changes and the developments that you would find in a local plan. Paragraphs 152 go on to give policies which relate to considerations when planning applications come forward within the green belt. So there is a difference between how a strategic site coming forward in a local plan is assessed against how a planning application should be considered, and I'm going to go on to discuss this. Firstly, let's look at paragraphs 144 to 151, covering the green belt boundaries and the grounds for alteration. The key words within these policies, which are mentioned in 144 and 145, are that greenbelt policies can only be altered in exceptional circumstances. It goes on to say in paragraph 146 that before concluding that exceptional circumstances exist, an authority must justify that it has looked at all reasonable alternatives, these being suitable brownfield sites, optimization of density on other sites, and whether neighbouring authorities could accommodate the need. CPRE Oxfordshire's view is that any development in the green belt should genuinely be exceptional, and by this we mean clearly in the public interest and only able to achieve its purpose if delivered in the green belt. The next section of policies, 152 to 156, refer to assessing a planning application in the green belt, and I've highlighted the important terms in these policies in red. Paragraph 152 states, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the green belt and should only be approved in very special circumstances. 153 states, when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness and any other form resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. And finally, 154 states a local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate in the green belt. There are specific exceptions which are stated in this paragraph, and I'll go on to detail these later in the video. Paragraph 155 then goes on to discuss developments which are not inappropriate, so long as they preserve the openness and do not conflict with the 5 purposes of the green belt. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but please feel free at this point to pause the video if you would like to review them. And then going on to paragraph 156, which talks about renewable energy projects. This is particularly relevant in our county as we see numerous solar farm developments coming forward. It states that developers must demonstrate that very special circumstances exist, but goes on to say that these may include wider environmental benefits associated with the increased production of energy from renewable sources. As this possible exception is mentioned specifically, this increases the case for a county-wide renewables plan, which puts brownfield sites and rooftops first. Renewable energy is not a very special circumstance to develop every bit of green belt, and decision makers should use discretion in determining whether the provision of renewable energy in a particular place is capable of outweighing the inevitable harm. The phrasing of these policies are subjective, somewhat of a lawyer's paradise to argue over. There are some really key terms here, which I'm going to discuss further and give you some examples of. Firstly, let's look at very special circumstances. It is widely agreed that the meaning remains unaltered from when it was first introduced in 1955. The 5 aims of the Green Belt must be considered and upheld. This was agreed and is often now cited in the case adjudicated by the Right Honourable Mr Justice Dove in the case of Atkins versus Tandridge City Council, where there was a challenge to the granting of planning permission for a motocross circuit in the Green Belt. It is also the case that proving very special circumstances is a stronger, more stringent test than proving exceptional circumstances. There must be more than one exceptional circumstance to meet a very special circumstances test. Developers will often cite unmet housing need, particularly for affordable housing in Oxford City, to be a case for very special circumstances. However, there's also guidance here, with this being cited as unlikely to outweigh harm and constitute very special circumstances. But it could be a circumstance along with other considerations which could meet the threshold. But a developer citing unmet housing need alone is unlikely to outweigh harm to the Green Belt. Let's go on to consider the term substantial weight. It is widely agreed that substantial weight is greater than significant weight. And there is some precedence from Sajid Javid's comments in 2016, where he stated that an out-of-date neighbourhood plan, where a Greenbelt site proposed for development was protected by policy, should be given very substantial weight. Going on to consider the phrase clearly outweighed, it's agreed that material considerations must clearly and not marginally outweigh potential harm to the Green Belt. There is an example of this, which was proved to be true, where the Secretary of State did grant planning permission for 500 homes, the benefit of which he considered did clearly outweigh the loss of a small amount of woodland, as there were multiple other benefits. Finally, let's discuss the term inappropriate. There was a key ruling in 2016 where development that is not in principle inappropriate is appropriate in the Green Belt. This went on to say that exceptions, by their very inclusion, are considered appropriate. And there are 7 exceptions stated in policy, which I'm going to take you through now. Once again, I'm going to take you through these exceptions fairly swiftly, but do feel free to pause the video if you'd like to review. The 7 exceptions are buildings for agriculture or forestry, provision for certain facilities, extensions or alterations of a building, replacement of a building, limited village infill, limited affordable housing, and finally, redevelopment of previously developed land. So just to recap, unless the development falls under one of these 7 specific categories, it is otherwise deemed to be inappropriate. I would also point out that even if a development falls into a Greenbelt exception, there may be other policies within the local plan that apply and could defeat it. Let's go on to look at local plans, and I'm going to take these by district in turn. Firstly, looking at Sherwell. The main Greenbelt policy here is policy ESD 14, and it states that the policy upholds NPPF policy and makes some provision for review around Kidlington. It states further small-scale review of the Greenbelt boundary will only be undertaken where exceptional circumstances can be demonstrated. Looking at West Oxfordshire, their main Greenbelt policy is OS2, and it very clearly states at the start that all development should, in the Greenbelt, comply with national policy. We'll go on to look at Oxford City Plan in 2036. Page 19 talks of the key elements of the strategy within this plan. Here the council considers that exceptional circumstances did exist to justify a Greenbelt boundary review due to Oxford's economic success and the additional housing need. The plan allocated 8 sites in the Greenbelt for development. But it goes on to say in policy G3 that other than these redesignated sites, proposals for the Oxford Greenbelt will be determined in accordance with national policy. The emerging latest draft Oxford Local Plan, which is currently at the stage of an inspector's review, has large housing numbers, but it does not put any further development in the Greenbelt. The Vale of White Horse Local Plan in 2031 has 2 parts to it. In part 1 of the plan, the Greenbelt is referred to in policy 13. It states that the Greenbelt will continue to be protected to maintain its openness and permanence, but development will be permitted in named settlements, and it goes on to name these settlements. During 2019-20, there were 26 permissions granted for development in the Greenbelt. These were all granted in line with this core policy 13 and considered to be appropriate development in the Greenbelt. Part 2 of the Vale of White Horse Local Plan has a further policy 13A, which refers to the Greenbelt and is amended to reflect the additional site of Dalton Barracks. However, the emerging draft South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse Local Plan shows no further development within the Greenbelt. And finally, let's look at South Oxfordshire Local Plan. Strategy 6 refers to the Greenbelt and its policy. It is very much supportive and in line with national policy, quoting many of the NPPF phrases. As I mentioned before, the draft joint South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse Local Plan has no further development in the Greenbelt. You also need to look at neighbourhood plans and see if there are any rural exception sites or any other references to the Greenbelt. And I would suggest that you can use the search tool for the word Greenbelt in any of these plans. I haven't gone into them in detail due to their numbers. So let's just conclude. When considering development in the Oxford Greenbelt, what should you be looking for? Well, following NPPF and local plan policy, your starting position should be reject with these considerations. If it is a strategic site proposed in a local plan, are exceptional circumstances proved? If not, reject. Does the proposal demonstrate very special circumstances? If not, reject. Is the building inappropriate? It is, unless it meets one of the 7 specific exceptions and should be rejected. Even if it does meet an exception, all other factors should be considered. Will this proposal harm the 5 purposes of the Green Belt in NPPF policy? If so, this must be given substantial weight and the application should be rejected. Is the potential harm clearly outweighed by other considerations? If not, reject. CPRE Oxfordshire's view is that exceptional must really be exceptional. Any development in the Green Belt must be clearly in the public interest and only able to achieve its purpose if delivered within the Green Belt. Thanks so much for spending the time to watch this video. If you'd like to know more about the work of CPRE Oxfordshire or discuss anything with us, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.